Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you have never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe. And don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. This week we are going to be talking about a solved case from the northeast of England, the case of Alice Ruggles. She was a young woman who became the victim of a brutal murder in 2016, and immediately as soon as Alice's body was found, everyone knew who was responsible for her death. The police had their suspect right from the very start because this suspect was someone that Alice had gone to the police about before due to the fact that he had been harassing and stalking her relentlessly in the weeks and months prior to her death. This case raised vital concerns regarding the police's response to cases like Alice's, as people questioned whether it could have been prevented, whether her killer could have been stopped. Join me as we delve into the heartbreaking story of Alice Ruggles. But just before we get into the case, please listen carefully to the following. This video contains heavy themes such as domestic abuse and violence, coercive control, gaslighting, and harassment and stalking. Viewer discretion is advised. So for this week's case, we are going back about 7.5 years now to October of 2016 in Gateshead, which is a town located in the county of Tyne and Wear in the northeast of England. It's kind of on the outskirts of Newcastle. And this is Alice Ruggles. She was a 24-year-old woman originally from Leicestershire. She grew up in a little village called Langton in Leicestershire. Alice was born on the 24th of December 1991, so on Christmas Eve. Her parents were called Clive and Sue, and Alice was one of 4 children. She had 2 brothers and their names were Nick and Patrick, and she also had a sister called Emma, and Alice was the 3rd child, so the 2nd youngest. And the Ruggles family were always very close. Alice was always close with her parents and her siblings, and by all accounts she had a good, happy, normal childhood for the most part. Alice was said to have been the glue that really held her family together, and she was described by her family as being a natural entertainer. You could not be bored when you were around Alice. She was always cracking jokes, always pulling pranks. She was very quick-witted, always trying to make people laugh. She was bubbly and outgoing. She was empathetic and a good listener. She always had a lot of friends. She was a very sociable person and she found it very easy to talk to people and make friends. She loved singing and the performing arts. She loved a bit of karaoke and she would always take part in school concerts and the choir and pantomimes and stuff like that. And in addition to that, Alice also loved fencing. It became a hobby of hers around the age of 11 when she was introduced to the sport as part of this course that she was doing, and yeah, she just fell in love with it. She really enjoyed fencing, so much so that she started playing for the Leicestershire team and the East Midlands team, and later at the age of 21 in 2012 she won the fencing women's épée at the Leeds Open. She adored the sport so much that in her later teenage years, when it came to choosing which university she was going to attend, one of the main things that she was looking at was whether the uni had a good fencing team that she could join. That was like almost the most important thing to her. It wasn't really about her degree, it was about the fencing team. Alice ultimately decided to go to the University of Northumbria in Newcastle, where she became the captain of the fencing team, of course. In 2014, she graduated from university with a degree in product design engineering, and it was after completing her degree that Alice decided that she didn't want to leave Newcastle. Although she was originally from Leicestershire, Newcastle almost felt like her home now. She was so content there, and so she decided to stay and start building a life for herself there. She had a couple of odd jobs working in various bars until eventually she managed to secure a job working for Sky, the broadcasting company, and she excelled in this job. She did so well that she was quickly given a promotion to be the personal assistant to the head of sales and site coordinator, and she seemed to really enjoy her career. She also eventually got herself a flat. She moved into a ground floor flat in Gateshead, which she shared with one of her friends. She had a roommate called Maxine, who I believe was also a co-worker. So yeah, all in all, life career-wise seemed to be going extremely well for Alice Ruggles. She was doing so well for herself. But it wasn't just her work life that was on the up. Towards the end of 2015, things were also looking very exciting for Alice in regards to her love life too. It was in October of 2015 when Alice went on a holiday to Sri Lanka with with one of her best friends, Jen. And during the flight there was this guy who very clearly took an interest in Alice. He was sitting next to her on the plane and he started hitting on her. And so her friend Jen posted about this on Facebook. She posted a picture of her and Alice and she wrote in the caption about how this guy on the plane fancied Alice. She wrote, being 10 minutes into a flight and the guy next to Alice asked for her phone number. Now, nothing ever ended up happening with that guy from the plane, but another guy did comment on Jen's status. It was a friend of a friend and he commented saying, quote, "I don't blame him," as in he doesn't blame the guy on the plane for having a crush on Alice. The man who left this comment was named Tremont Dillon, who actually went by Harry for the most part. Most people who knew him just called him Harry, so I'll be referring to him as Harry for the majority of this video. So just for a bit of extra information about him, Harry Dillon was a couple of years older than Alice. I think he was around 26 when this case occurred, and obviously she was 24. He was originally from India. He was the only child to his parents, who raised him as a devout Sikh, and his father worked in the military. He was a colonel for the Indian Army, so apparently the family would move around a lot for his job, and it seemed as though Harry had clearly decided to follow in his father's footsteps career-wise. He did go to university. He actually moved abroad away from his family to Edinburgh in Scotland, and he went to uni there. I think he studied strategy management, but after getting his degree, he actually decided to enlist in the British Army and become a soldier just like his dad. He eventually became Lance Corporal, and although he lived in Edinburgh, his barracks was in Edinburgh, in October of 2015, at the time that he left that comment on Jen's Facebook status about Alice, about finding Alice attractive, he was stationed in Afghanistan. A couple of days after leaving this comment on Jen's Facebook post, Harry Dillon started messaging Jen, just asking how she was, as he was good friends with one of Jen's friends, and he once again complimented Alice in this message, saying that he thought that she was beautiful. And from here, Harry and Alice started messaging. They added each other on Facebook and pretty much just started texting each other all the time. And Alice was over the moon, really, because Harry was so nice to her. He was always complimenting her, making her laugh. She was just smitten with a guy that she had only spoken to online. And Harry seemed to feel the same about Alice. They just clicked instantly, and over the coming weeks they would continue to message each other and FaceTime all the time. And within literally a month, I believe, they'd said "I love you" to each other, and they even became official. They announced that they were in a relationship, even though they still hadn't met in person yet. So things did seem to be moving really fast between them. It was a couple of months after they first started speaking, in January of 2016, when finally Alice and Harry were actually able to meet for the first time face to face. Harry returned to the UK from Afghanistan and he went to stay with Alice in Newcastle for about a week, and then sources state that Alice went back to stay with him in Edinburgh for another week. So they spent about a fortnight together in total, and that spark that they had over messages and over FaceTime seemed to be just as present, if not more present, when they were with one another in person too. Alice was still smitten with Harry. He would buy her loads of gifts and they would go out on cute little adventures together. And then after these 2 weeks, Harry went back for his final tour to Afghanistan, which was going to mean that he and Alice would be apart for about 2 months. So yeah, that meant that they were now in a long distance relationship once again, but they still kept in regular contact, of course, and made time for each other to speak on the phone. And Alice was still head over heels, even telling her mother Sue that she believed that Harry was the one. He was her soulmate. I mean, to an outsider's perspective, Alice and Harry really seemed to have the perfect relationship, or at least that was until cracks started to appear. I believe it was when Harry eventually came back to the UK after his 2-month tour in Afghanistan, when Alice's friends and family started noticing some changes in her, just changes in her personality. So for example, whereas before Alice was always a very happy and bubbly, sociable and outgoing person, slowly over time they noticed this switch in her and she became very kind of quiet and withdrawn and distant. She started speaking to her friends and family less and less, and they also noticed that she had lost quite a substantial amount of weight within a relatively short amount of time, which of course concerned them. And it didn't take Alice's loved ones long to realise what the cause of all of this was, or who the cause was, I should say. It was her boyfriend, Harry Dillon. There was a switch in Harry's behaviour too. As I said at the beginning of the relationship, Harry practically doted on Alice, always paying her compliments, telling her how beautiful she was, treating her and buying her presents. He really seemed to be like a knight in shining armour almost. But clearly, this was all a facade. It was like he did all of these nice, wonderful things at the start to reel her in. And now, once he had her, once they were actually in a relationship, but this mask of his started to slip and he was almost a completely different person. He just started to exhibit very possessive and controlling behaviours, such as always having to know where Alice was or who she was with, checking her phone constantly, getting very jealous if she ever spoke to another man. If she was hanging out with friends and he couldn't get a hold of her, he would start messaging the friends that she was with and asking them to get Alice to respond to his text. Sources state that he started getting annoyed at Alice when she would put makeup on or she would dress up nicely to go out. I would imagine, again, because of his jealousy. He didn't like the thought of her looking her best, I suppose, because he was so possessive of Alice and he didn't like the thought of other men looking at her because in his eyes, Alice was his. She belonged to him. In fact, apparently, if Alice even just spoke to another man, Harry would accuse her of flirting with them for just speaking to another guy. And in addition to all of that, Harry just started pretty much doing everything he could to make Alice feel crap about herself, basically. He just started making horrible comments about her appearance. So for example, one time he sent her a text message in which he made a comment about how hairy her forearms were in a picture that she had posted. And then he would say something like, oh, well, I don't mind that you have hairy arms, but other men probably wouldn't like it. Another time he apparently made a comment about how big he thought Alice's nose was. He would just say awful things like that to her to purposefully make her feel self-conscious and less confident, which is horrible. You know, he's her partner. He's supposed to be the one to make her feel like she's the most attractive and beautiful woman in the world, and instead he was making her feel the opposite. And so, yeah, naturally Alice started to kind of go into her shell a bit more. She did lose a lot of confidence. She became very insecure. Harry would also try to make Alice jealous a lot. One time when they were on FaceTime together, he pulled this long strand of blonde hair off of the clothing that he was wearing and he like almost held it up to Alice on the camera. He wanted her to see this long blonde hair, clearly because he wanted her to think that he had been very close with another girl, a blonde-haired girl. And of course, naturally, she did think that. And when she confronted him about this hair, he started gaslighting her and manipulating her into thinking that she was going crazy and she was making things up. In July of 2016, Alice went on holiday with her parents and her siblings to Cornwall. This was kind of a yearly tradition for the Ruggles family. And this year, Alice brought her boyfriend Harry along too. And again, her family just noticed how different she seemed to be on this holiday. Her brother Nick said that she was just, quote, a bit less Alice. And this was, again, because of the controlling, abusive behaviour that she was being subjected to by Harry. And then just days after this holiday ended and Alice was obviously back home in Gateshead, she received an online message, I think to her Facebook, from this girl that she didn't know. And this message basically said, do you realise that your boyfriend is cheating on you? It turns out that Harry had been messaging this girl and several other women on dating apps like Tinder. He was in a relationship with Alice and he was messaging other women, and some sources even state that he was meeting up with them for casual sex too. He'd literally been making Alice feel guilty for even talking to another man, and yet the whole time he was cheating on her. And for Alice, this was it. This was the final straw. This was something that she could not forgive. And so after finding out, she ended things. She officially broke up with Harry. However, Harry Dillon had clearly decided that he was going to make this breakup as difficult as he possibly could, because he did not want things to end. Despite what he had done, he was not willing to accept her breaking up with him and just let her go, let her get on with her life. And so he pretty much started just harassing Alice constantly. He would send her hundreds of text messages, just begging her to take him back, telling her that he still loved her and that he couldn't live without her. He would call her constantly and leave countless messages on her voicemail, just sobbing and crying, and again pleading with her to give him another chance. And this was every single day. Every day the messages and the calls were just endless. And when this wouldn't work, when Alice still refused to take him back and she just outright ignored him, these weepy, feeling sorry for himself messages would start to turn threatening. He would threaten Alice. At one point, he threatened to post revealing pictures of Alice that he had apparently taken without her knowing before. He threatened to post them online. Apparently, he would also threaten suicide. He would threaten to kill himself if she didn't get back together with him. And when this, again, wouldn't work, he kind of started harassing Alice's friends and family too. He would message them and beg them to get Alice to speak to him. Alice, of course, blocked Harry, blocked him on all social media accounts and blocked his phone number, although he ended up just getting a new number, a new SIM card that he could continue to message her on. He even started hacking into her social media accounts. He hacked into her Facebook so that he could check who she was messaging and check what she was doing. He even installed spyware on her phone. I think he must have done this when they were still together. He'd secretly taken her phone and installed this spyware without her knowledge. That's how insanely controlling this man was. It didn't take long for Alice to realise what he was doing, realise that he had hacked her online accounts, and so she messaged him asking him to please stop hacking into her things, and he just responded saying no. And it got to the point where Alice's brother Nick had to help Alice literally wipe her entire phone and factory reset it, reset her password on things. I think she even closed down the Facebook that Harry had hacked into and she set up a new one. And so when it became harder and harder for him to get Alice's attention via text message and social media, Harry would literally drive down to Gateshead where Alice lived, all the way from Edinburgh where he lived, which is like a 2.5 hour drive. And he would do this on many occasions just in the hopes that he would see Alice and manage to convince her to get back with him. So not only was he harassing her online, but he was stalking her now. This was stalking. He would just not leave Alice alone. He was furious that she was refusing to speak to him or take him back. To him, it was like, how dare she? How dare she ignore me like this? How dare she turn down my advances? But something which Alice wasn't fully aware of was that this wasn't the first time that Harry Dillon had reacted in this way to a girlfriend breaking up with him. He apparently had a history of harassing and stalking his exes. In fact, one of his exes before Alice had even taken out a restraining order against him. This was about 3 years before this case occurred, because apparently when she refused to get back together with Harry and she started seeing someone else, Harry walked up to her on the street and he spat in her face. He just could not handle rejection. He could not handle women turning him down. And so, as you can imagine, when Harry eventually found out that Alice was starting to move on with someone else, he couldn't handle that either. In September of 2016, Alice went on a little weekend trip away to Germany to see her sister Emma, as Emma was living in Germany at the time. And while she was there, she met a new guy named Mike, who was an army officer and a friend of her sister's, and they seemed to really hit it off. Mike really liked Alice and Alice really liked him, and so they started seeing each other. However, when Harry Dillon found out about this, he was furious and he started trying to get in contact with Mike. He was messaging Mike, telling him that Alice was still in love with him, with Harry, and that she was cheating on Mike. Obviously, Mike knew that this was all just a load of crap because Alice had told him about Harry and all of the abuse that he had subjected her to. By the end of September in 2016, things with Harry still hadn't died down. The harassment and stalking of Alice continued. I think Alice probably hoped that over time, if she continued to just ignore, then eventually he would get bored. Harry would get bored and he would lose interest and finally leave her alone. But that just wasn't happening. If anything, it was getting worse and worse and just more intense. events. So much so that on the 30th of September 2016, Harry once again left a voicemail on Alice's phone, begging her to call him back and speak with him. And when she didn't, he once again drove the 2.5 hours from Edinburgh to Gateshead. He arrived in Gateshead that evening, and whilst Alice was inside of her flat, Harry rang her doorbell and then hid outside. And so of course when Alice would look through the peephole in her front door, she wouldn't see anyone there. And then a few minutes later, the same thing would happen again. Harry would ring the doorbell and hide, and then he would do it again. He was clearly just trying to scare her as much as he could. He continued to hide outside for a couple of hours, and then later that night when Alice was lying in bed, all of a sudden she heard someone knocking on her bedroom window. So she immediately opened the curtains and looked outside, and there was Harry just standing there, staring back at her. He'd climbed over her back fence to get to her bedroom window. He stared at her, and then he proceeded to put some flowers and chocolates on her windowsill, and then he slowly started backing off and walking away. He clearly thought that this would be it. In his delusional mind, this would be the thing that would win her back. But obviously it didn't. If anything, it just made Alice even more anxious and scared. And in fact, on his drive back to Edinburgh that night, he rang Alice again. He left her another voicemail, and in it he said, quote, "I'm not intending to kill you." And I cannot even imagine how terrifying even just that one line would have been to Alice. I mean, why the hell would he even say that he wasn't intending to kill her? Why had the thought of killing her even entered his mind? After telling her friends about this, about what happened that night, they all urged Alice to go to the police. It was time to report what Harry was doing to the police, and so that's exactly what she did. Alice contacted 101, and there are audio clips of her call online, so I will play it if I can.
Hi there, I just need a bit of advice really, more than anything. So I split up with my boyfriend about 3 months ago. Since then, I know that he's hacked into my Facebook and also my phone. He's been sending me a lot of messages even though I've asked him not to contact me. And then tonight I had a knock at my door. There was no one there, and then it happened again 2 or 3 times. He's come round the back, knocked on my bedroom window at the back of my flat, it's the ground floor flat. He's been outside and he's like left some flowers and chocolates on the outside windowsill, and he walked off. He's not done anything, but I'm concerned. My friends have been telling me to call the police. I've been putting it off, but I just feel a bit shaken up tonight. So
well, it can be classed as harassment.
Yeah.
Which is a crime.
So as you will have just heard, the officer that Alice spoke to on the phone identified what Harry was doing as harassment. And they basically gave Alice 2 options. Number 1, she could hire a solicitor and take out an injunction on Harry, which could be very expensive. Or number 2, she could take out a PIN notice, which stands for Police Information Notice. And it basically means that when someone like Alice has raised allegations of harassment, the police will go to the harasser, so in this case Harry, and essentially give him a caution, a verbal warning to stop what he is doing, because if he doesn't, he will be arrested. So the PIN was issued, and it was almost like following this, Alice felt like she could breathe again. She felt like, okay, finally this is going to stop now. This will make Harry finally leave me alone. And all of her colleagues and her loved ones noticed how after issuing this PIN, Alice was almost instantly back to her old bright and bubbly self again, because she felt at ease for the first time in a long time. But sadly, this didn't last very long, because of course Harry wasn't going to leave her alone. He was informed that she had taken out a PIN against him. Oddly enough, through his army superior, actually, not the police. The police contacted Harry's barracks in Edinburgh where he was living, and they told them about the PIN, and they passed it on to Harry, which seems very bizarre to me that the police told his superior and didn't contact Harry directly about the PIN. Apparently that's actually against police protocol, according to a couple of sources. Anyway, he was informed about this PIN, and it clearly didn't faze him at all, because within a week of of Alice issuing the pin, he had made contact once again. He sent Alice this big parcel containing like pictures of the two of them that they had taken when they were a couple, this notebook that Alice had previously given him, and also this long letter. He wrote her this letter, and I have a quote here from the letter. He said, "I'm in a lot of shit. I hope you feel happy now. I know you are stronger. I know you feel happy. I know you have moved on. I know you've got a new guy, but I've not been able to say bye." Apparently he also wrote, quote, "I'm sending you everything I have that reminds me of you, as you belong to another man. Wishing you two a happy life." And I think that that quote in itself says a hell of a lot about the way that Harry Dillon viewed Alice and just women in general. The fact that he says you belong to another man, belong, as if she's some kind of possession, as if she's an object, not a human being. Of course, because this was a breach of the PIN notice, him contacting Alice, she called the police again. This was on the 7th of October 2016, so about a week after her first call. And whereas with her first call to the police, Alice felt quite relieved and reassured that, you know, the police would act if Harry breached the PIN, she was made to feel the complete opposite during her second call. Apparently, the officer that Alice spoke to almost made her feel like she was a nuisance and that she had, I don't know, called for no reason, made her feel like her reason for calling was stupid. In fact, according to a documentary that I watched, the officer even said words to the effect of, "Well, what do you expect us to do about it? Arrest him?" And Alice was understandably so upset. She messaged her sister after calling the police again saying, "They're not helping me. They'll effing resound once he's effing stabbed me." I mean, can you even imagine how Alice must have been feeling after this second call to the police? She must have felt so alone and so scared because they seemed to make it clear that they weren't going to do anything. They had no intention of stepping in and keeping her safe from her stalker. And if they did, if the police had stepped in following this second call and actually done something, they most likely would have prevented what Harry Dillon would go on to do next. It was the 12th of October 2016, so just 5 days after Alice's second call, and that day she was just at work as usual, working for Sky in Newcastle, and when work ended she was dropped back home to her flat in Gateshead by a colleague, which had recently become a regular occurrence. All of her co-workers knew about what Alice had been going through, the stalking and harassment that she had been subjected to at the hands of her ex-boyfriend, and so to help her feel more safe, they had very kindly said that they would drop her home every single day to make sure that she got back okay. So yeah, at around 5:30 p.m. on the 12th, she was dropped back to her flat in Gateshead, and she was actually home alone that evening. As I mentioned earlier, she also lived with her colleague. Her flatmate was a co-worker named Maxine, and Maxine was out of the house when Alice arrived that evening. So yeah, Alice was just there alone, and it seemed as though initially she was just having a pretty normal evening. She was messaging Mike because they had plans to see each other in a couple of days' time, so they were arranging what they were going to do together, so everything seemed fine. But then all of a sudden Alice went radio silent. Out of the blue, she just suddenly stopped replying to any of her text messages, and it wouldn't be long before it was realised why when Alice's roommate Maxine returned home. Maxine returned to the flat at around 6:30 p.m, so only about an hour after Alice arrived home from work, and she couldn't actually get into the flat through the front door because it was locked, and I think the latch was on or something, or Maxine just didn't have her key, and so she couldn't open the door. So she started trying to call Alice's phone, asking her to open the door and let her in, but she got no response. However, Maxine did notice that Alice's bedroom window was open around the back of the flat, and they lived on the ground floor, and so she climbed through the window, and immediately when she got into Alice's room, she noticed that I think Alice's wardrobe door had been pulled off or something, which seemed really strange. But Alice wasn't in there and she couldn't hear her anywhere in the flat. But then Maxine walked into the bathroom, and upon doing so, she walked into the most horrifying scene that you could possibly imagine. In the bathroom, she found 24-year-old Alice Ruggles lying on the floor, unresponsive and absolutely covered in blood. There was blood everywhere from where Alice had been stabbed. It was immediately clear that Alice had been the victim of a truly vicious and brutal attack. So of course, extremely panicked, Maxine immediately picked up the phone and she called 999, and obviously she was distraught on the phone call. She was telling the operator that Alice was dead, that it looked as though she had been attacked, and she even said that they knew this was coming because, and I quote, her ex is an absolute psychopath. That is what Maxine told the operator. Maxine knew instantly exactly who had done this to Alice, who had killed her. It was Harry Dillon. Once the emergency services arrived, there was nothing that they could do, and Alice was sadly pronounced dead at the scene. And while some officers were dispatched to go and inform her family of the tragic news, others were sent to apprehend the main suspect provided by Maxine. And Harry Dillon was arrested in Edinburgh just a couple of hours after Alice was found dead. He was taken back to Newcastle, where he was interviewed by the police, and he immediately denied it, denied having any part in Alice's death. He actually tried at first to act completely shocked that Alice was dead, as if he was hearing the news for the first time.
Are you saying that Alice is dead? Or someone's...
All I can tell you is that you've been arrested on suspicion of the murder of Alice Ruggles.
Now, Harry Dillon didn't deny going to Alice's flat that night. Well, actually, tell a lie, he did at first. At first, he claimed that he had been in Edinburgh the whole night and that he'd been nowhere near her flat. However, the police very quickly gathered evidence which proved that this was a lie. His phone records from that evening showed that he had, in fact, travelled down to Gateshead and that he left Gateshead around 6:30 p.m, just minutes before Alice's body was discovered by Maxine. And in addition to that, CCTV cameras had picked up his car in Gateshead, and so when he was confronted with this evidence, he was forced to change his account. He came up with a new story whereby he claimed that on the day of Alice's death, on the 12th of October, he did drive down to Gateshead from Edinburgh. He made that 2.5-hour journey, but he claimed that he only wanted to speak to Alice and that he wasn't the one who killed her. There are video clips of his interview online, so I will play the ones where Harry gives his version of events from that night now.
So Harry, at 18:34 hours yesterday, Alice Ruggles was found at her home address in Gateshead and she'd been murdered. Okay, did you murder Alice?
No, I did not murder Alice.
Do you have any knowledge of this?
No, I don't have any knowledge of this.
Were you present when this murder occurred?
No, I wasn't.
Can you tell me what you were doing yesterday then, from 10 a.m. until the time you were arrested last night?
I drove down towards Newcastle, and because I just wanted answers. So I drove down to speak to her.
So you've knocked on the door and there's been no reply.
No
Did you go
reply.
back to the car?
No.
Did you go straight round the back?
Straight down the back. I jumped over the wall.
So you've jumped over?
Yeah. So I've jumped over, and she then started saying, what are you doing here? I'm going to call the police, leave now. And I'm like, Alice, please calm down. Stop panicking. I'm just here to speak to you. You've not given me my answers. I just want my answers.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm going to call 999. I'm like, okay, I'm leaving. I don't want any trouble with the police again. I'm leaving.
We're looking for fingerprints. We're looking for blood transfer from the scene to the car.
See, the thing is, sorry, I'm in trouble. There won't be any blood transfer because there was no blood on me when I left that place.
So are you saying when you left her she had no injuries or anything?
Oh, no, absolutely nothing. No injuries, nothing. She was perfectly fine, fit, healthy.
So that was his story. He claimed that yes, he did go to Alice's flat that night, but that he left as soon as she threatened to call the police, and that was the last he saw her. She was alive and well when he last saw her, so someone else must have murdered her after he left. Of course, the detectives didn't believe this for 1 minute, and soon they had evidence to prove it, prove Harry's guilt. Firstly, they found evidence in the way of blood in Harry's car. Traces of Alice's blood were discovered on his steering wheel, and her blood was also found on this Help for Heroes wristband that Harry wore. So if he had nothing to do with her death, then why the hell would her blood have been found on this item of clothing and in his vehicle? And as well as that, I also read on one source that Harry's DNA was found underneath Alice's fingernails from where she had, you know, clearly tried to scratch at him and defend herself. So just the day following Alice's death, Harry Dillon was charged with murder, to which he pleaded not not guilty, and he went to trial at Newcastle Crown Court in April of 2017. And by the time his trial rolled around, he'd completely changed his story from that night again. So this would have been the third time that he had changed it. And this new story that he came up with was just absolutely insane, to say the least. He basically claimed now that he was present when Alice died, but he didn't kill her. She effectively killed herself in front of him. Harry's new version of events was that he went to Alice's flat that night to collect some clothing of his that he had previously left there when they were still together, and he said that whilst he was inside the flat, Alice grabbed a knife from the kitchen and she tried to attack him. She came at him with a knife. He said that he began trying to defend himself and fight Alice off. A struggle ensued between them, and that during this struggle, somehow Alice plunged the knife into her neck herself. I think he tried to claim that she either fell on the knife or something, or she just genuinely stabbed herself in the neck. That was his new story about how Alice died that night. Absolutely ludicrous, as I'm sure you'll agree, and the prosecution put forward their version of events to the jury, what they believed happened on the night that Alice died based on the evidence. The prosecution presented to the jury about how Harry Dillon was an abuser. They detailed everything that he had done to Alice in the weeks and months leading up to her death, all of the abuse that she was subjected to, the harassment, the stalking, and how her murder in Harry's eyes was a case of, well, if I can't have you, then no one can. In his twisted mind, Alice was his possession. So when she refused to get back with him and dared to start seeing another man, and when she called the police on him, he lost it and decided to brutally kill her as revenge. If she wasn't going to be with him, then she didn't get to live. It was as simple as that for Harry Dillon. So on the evening of the 12th, he drove from Edinburgh to Gateshead. And I think it's important to point out here again that this car journey is 2.5 hours long. 2.5 hours he drove for that afternoon to get to Alice. And not once during that time did he change his mind and turn around. Not once did he think, I shouldn't be doing this. What the hell am I doing? He set out to end Alice's life that day, and that was what he was going to do. Once arriving in Gateshead, he parked up near Alice's flat. He waited for her to return home from work, and when she did, he continued waiting in his car for a little while before eventually getting out and breaking into the flat through an open window, I believe Alice's bedroom window. It's believed that there was some kind of struggle between Alice and Harry in her bedroom, hence why Alice's wardrobe door had come off the hinges, but maybe Harry pulled it off, intent on using it as a weapon to harm Alice or something. And the prosecution believed that, obviously panicked, Alice ran to the bathroom and she locked herself in there to get away from Harry. So Harry went and he grabbed a knife from the kitchen and he began kicking in the bathroom door, and there were footmarks on the bathroom door to support this, to support the theory that he kicked the door in. And once he was inside, he attacked Alice with the knife. He began stabbing her in the neck with this knife repeatedly. I believe she sustained about 6 stab wounds to the neck in total, but they weren't even like single puncture wounds, they were more like slits. He'd slit her throat. He'd drawn the knife across her throat 6 times. In fact, Alice actually had a lot of bruising on her back, the police noticed when her body was found, and they theorised that that was from where Harry had her face down on the ground and he had stood on her back. He put all of his weight on her back and then he pulled her head back using her hair, and that was when he began slitting her throat. And just thinking about how terrified Alice must have been in that moment, knowing that she was about to die at the hands of the man who had been terrorising her for months, the man that she had reported to the police, is just incomprehensible. And then after killing Alice, he just left her blood-soaked body on the bathroom floor, left the flat, and he drove back to Edinburgh as if nothing had happened. The trial lasted for about 11 days, I believe, and at the end of the trial, of course, course, he was convicted. Tremaine Dillon was found guilty of the murder of 24-year-old Alice Ruggles, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 22 years. So at the earliest, he could become eligible for parole around 2038, 2039 time, but let's hope that he is never let out of prison. In the aftermath of this case, a domestic homicide review into Alice's death was launched, and understandably, Northumbria police came under huge fire for their handling of Alice's reports to them in the lead up to her death. As we know, she contacted them twice. The first time was just under 2 weeks before she was killed, and the second time was just 5 days before. So the Independent Office for Police Conduct launched an investigation, and as a result, a couple of Northumbria police officers faced disciplinary action for misconduct due to failing to appropriately investigate Harry Dillon's stalking, and also for just genuinely not even registering it as stalking. When Alice called the police to report what Harry had been doing, they labelled it as harassment, not as stalking. And of course, there's a huge difference between those two crimes. Stalking is a lot more aggressive and relentless, and that was definitely the case with Harry Dillon, but yet the police failed to recognise that. If they had, maybe they would have done more and actually acted in a way to keep Alice safe from him. It was established following these reports that there was not enough training within the police force when it comes to handling cases of stalking. There was not enough understanding about what stalking actually is, what it looks like. There were so many lessons that the police needed to learn from Alice's story so that they could hopefully greatly improve the way that they handle cases like this in future to prevent anything like this happening again. And lessons were learned. The Domestic Homicide Review made 20 recommendations aimed at national, regional and local bodies to help prevent similar cases from occurring, and several police forces began to provide updated training, and a new protocol was put in place so that the police had more knowledge on how to appropriately deal with future stalking and harassment cases similar to Alice's. And Alice's family have a big part to play in all of this, a big part to play in educating people on stalking and harassment, because following Alice's death, they set up the Alice Ruggles Trust, and their main aim is, well, what I just said, to spread awareness of stalking and coercive control. They provide training and education, and they campaign for the correct legal measures to be in place so that stalking victims actually receive the proper help that they need. Honestly, the list goes on. The work that they do is just incredible, and it's all in Alice's name. And you can learn more about it via the Alice Ruggles Trust website, which is linked in the description box, as well as a link to their donation page if anyone watching would like to make a contribution and help fund the amazing work that they do. A really, really worthy cause and a really lovely legacy for Alice. But that is it for this case. That concludes the case of Alice Ruggles. A really harrowing and heartbreaking case, and sadly one that seems to be all too familiar on this channel. I feel like I've covered quite a few cases now where young women are brutally killed at the hands of their ex-partner despite going to the police about them beforehand and just not receiving any help or support. If you remember, a couple of months ago I covered the murder of Tiana Notice where this was the case. The Shana Grice case is another that I've talked about. She was so let down by the police, and it's just so devastating and so disappointing. But I guess all we can hope for with cases like this is that lessons really are learned and that the police know to do better in the future. But yeah, that is it for this case. As always, please do let me know your thoughts and opinions on the case down below in the comments. I would love to hear what you guys think, and also feel free to let me know of any other cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. They can be solved cases, unsolved cases, serial killer cases, you name it. Again, you can pop them down below in the comments, or alternatively, I do have a case request form linked in the description box too. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Mollie. Bye.